Welcome to Untold Stories, Growing Up in Ashland, Hanover, Black and White Experiences. My name is Anthony Keat, and I have served on the committee for this program for years. We felt it was still risky to hold a large indoor event this year. However, we have assembled 6 storytellers to share their stories. Thanks to Tom Wolf, our video producer, we have the next best thing, a live program, a complete program on tape. Our Untold Stories program evolved out of conversations among sponsoring organizations, during which we realized that we were all talking about doing similar programs. Some focused on Black History Month, some on preserving our cultural and historical heritage in video and oral histories, and some focused on Ashland's Founders Day. This is our 9th year preserving this program. We are fortunate to have 6 people who will share their own stories. Their neighbors and friends have something in their stories that will speak to our minds and hearts. The stories are personal, and I think you will find them informative, entertaining, and powerful. Someone has said that we are so fortunate to be able to hear ordinary people tell extraordinary stories. Let's begin. Our first speaker is Terry Alexander. Terry grew up in Ashland and attended Miss Herndon's school as a 1st and 2nd grader, then Henry Clay Elementary School and high school. After graduating from Mary Baldwin College in 1963, she left the state for 50 years, living in California and Alaska. She worked for the Federal Aviation Administration for 30 years, then had a second career as an adult education. She returned to Ashland in 2011. Welcome, Terry.
Hello, everyone. Born in 1942, I grew up in the segregated town of Ashland, where everyone had a place, and social harmony required keeping your place. I had my first lesson about that on the way to kindergarten at the Episcopal Church, then on the corner of Arlington and Center. We lived 2 blocks east. Now, even though Black folks generally had their place in Berkeley Town, there were also Black families at 104 and 106 Arlington Street. So as I passed by one day, I spotted a little girl about my age in the front yard of one of those houses. She smiled and waved. I smiled and waved back. I didn't see skin color. I saw a playmate. When I excitedly told my mother about the new friend, she explained why this could not be. I don't recall the exact words she used. I just remember my disappointment and sadness. I never saw her in that yard again, nor did I ever have a playmate who did not look like me. After kindergarten, I spent 2 years at Miss Ann Herndon's private school, one of several that had been established to relieve overcrowding of the Henry Clay elementary and high schools. Our class of 19 received close attention from Miss Ann, assisted by her sister, Miss Mariah, and their tutelage reflected values of their day, themes of Christianity and patriotism, both to our country and to the Confederacy, ran through the scrapbooks we constructed. We started with the story of creation in the 1st grade, and copied poems about family, nature, and holidays in careful cursive writing, which she taught us from day one, no block letters. On the last day of the school year, we became the last class to attend one of these historic private schools. The Herndon sisters had retired. In 1950, I only had to walk 1 extra block north to begin 3rd grade at Henry Clay Elementary. This was also the year of Brown versus Board of Education, as well as the opening of John M. Gandy School, which offered our unseen, unknown counterparts north of town something we had always taken for granted: central heating and indoor plumbing. I doubt that we were aware of either event. To me, Henry Clay was just a terrifyingly large building with 16 or so classrooms opening onto one long hallway. I quickly adapted, although many of us still shudder at the memory of the booming voice of our principal, George Compton, "Stop running in the hall." Among the usual subjects, we did have lessons of Black history. Yes, sirree, we learned about Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver, and that about covered it. Even then, I puzzled over the anomaly of venerating these two men when I knew their population had been relegated to a much lower stratum of society and privilege. For 6th and 7th grades, we traveled a few steps north to the metal buildings, two temporary structures which actually stood for a very long time. When we finished 7th grade, we once again became the last class. For Hanover was one of the last few counties in Virginia to have an 11-year school system. Thus, the classes behind us would no longer go directly to freshman year in high school as we did. But Hanover's coming out of that 11-year system so late caused an age disadvantage for us, especially for students like me with fall birthdays. I would be barely 17 when I started college, 1 to 2 years younger than my classmates. This had a profound effect on me, both in college and in starting out in life. In 1956, we progressed a few feet further north to Henry Clay High School with Nelson Taylor as principal, bringing a younger, fresher, more mellow vibe than we had known in our earlier days. He had the ability to be both leader and friend. And we always had another friend in Buck Dabney, the only Black person I'd really known since my family's long ago ironing woman, Melissa. He was school custodian as well as bell ringer. Beloved by all, he merited a full-page picture and tribute in at least 2 yearbooks. But by now, in the mid-1950s, we could no longer be unaware of racial tensions around our differences. It wasn't long after Rosa Parks' famous refusal to move on a Montgomery, Alabama bus that I was on the Ashland-Richmond bus, seated just in front of the side door that was also the line of demarcation between Black and white. Suddenly, a Black girl about my age appeared from the back of the bus and sat down beside me. Did I think, oh, goody, a playmate? Not at all. While one part of me truly didn't mind her being there, another felt panic. A line had been crossed, and what was I supposed to do about it? I looked around at the other white passengers and at the bus driver. Though it was very, very quiet, no one seemed perturbed. And so the wheels of the bus went round and round, and pretty soon she reached her stop and got off. My grown-up self still wonders why I didn't just turn to her and say, hi. In my teens, I worked part-time at my father's hardware store in Mechanicsville. This was really challenging for a clueless adolescent girl, and probably totally frustrating for the hapless male customers. But one day I could be helpful when the director of the recently established Camp Hanover came in with a request. He had a temporary staffing shortage, so I was hired to help with camp activities, unaware that this was the first integrated church camp in the South. Now at school in these changing times, we'd had discussions about things such as, excuse me, why shouldn't we integrate? One answer I'd heard from elders was, but if they go to school together, then there'll be dances, and then they'll dance together, and then unspoken consequences. But here at Camp Hanover, among the usual camp activities, we all danced together, girl and boy, Black and white. It was folk dancing, mind you, nothing romantic, but a refreshing freedom from all these rules about who could interact with whom and where. In 1959, I hit my third last class milestone, as this would be the last class to graduate from Henry Clay High School. Buck Dabney rang the last bell. In the fall, I was off to Mary Baldwin College, in those days an all-white women's college in the mountains. In that somewhat cloistered environment, I was generally unaware of the integration starting to take place in county schools. I left town soon after graduation, leaving behind the memory of a segregated town. In 2011, after a 50-year gap in my Ashland Hanover story, while I worked first in California, then 40 years in Alaska, I returned to Ashland. And even though I've always had family here and visited often, this has been a decade of discovering life in an integrated state and town and bearing witness to significant changes yet to come about. My college alma mater had become diverse in more ways than I could ever have imagined. And in town, people of both races had become more comfortable with one another, no longer tiptoeing around into strictly defined places. We could eat and drink and laugh and watch movies together whenever we wanted. We were comfortable enough that it was no longer shocking, nor even illegal, if family trees such as ours began sprouting sprigs of black and white and beautiful shades of brown. It also became a time of great upheaval. We saw Confederate monuments come down and marched together in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. But one thing that truly personified the Ashland spirit was the Ashland Variety Show, where everybody could participate regardless of race or even talent. My experience there led me to the gospel choir performances at these Untold Stories events. Here, I finally got to know about the lives and stories of many of the folks from a part of town that had been off limits to my younger self. They were both enlightening and uplifting. But after hearing these stories, I have one wistful regret. I never had the moxie as a teenager to cross that invisible barrier on Henry Street to buy a pastry at Lightfoot's Bakery. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Terry. Our next speaker is Leon D. Brooks, Sr. Leon was born February 27, 1950, to William Oscar Brooks and Estelle Walker Brooks. The walk to Pole Green Elementary School was 1.5 miles from his home. Everyone used the same mailbox 1 mile away, RFD 2, Box 220, Ellison, Virginia. Electricity was provided to Pine Hill in Ellison in 1957. When telephone service was provided, it was a party line, which he rarely got a chance to use. Leon joined the military on January 21st, 1971, and served until April 1997. As you will hear in his story, he was instrumental in the removal of the Confederate flag in the Air National Guard and in public places in Virginia.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Leon D. Brooks, Sr. Growing up in Hanover County in the 50s, racism was the core of our experience. At that time, we had what's called the village concept. It took a village to raise a child. The elders of the village, they had enough wisdom, ethics, intelligence, and know-how to free us from any negative event that would occur in our lives, whatever we would have to endure. Now, my job as a young man in the village, along with others, was to observe who carried what attributes, and then how to apply those due attributes in due season. Now, what had happened to our communities was the European had found a way. He was astute enough to dismantle that village. That village has been dismantled. Now, we were growing up in a neighborhood where the mailbox was 1 mile away. We walked 1.5 miles to school. The mailbox number at that time was RFD 2, Box 220, Ellison, Virginia. We had a phone with 746-1713. It was a party line, and the whole neighborhood was on that party line. You never got a chance to talk. We got electricity in 1957, and it was just a wonderful childhood with our elders. We rode a bus 53. That was Mr. John Bird's bus, a bus number 41, Miss Louise Randolph's bus. And we would come through an area called Black Creek in Mechanicsville, Virginia. And that's where the European boys would get behind the bus, and they would pass us with the rebel flags and all this crazy paraphernalia, and they had this swing chain. They would swing that thing around and swing it at the bus or swing it up at the windows. It was a scary experience because, like the young man just said, the bus would break down so frequently. And oftentimes when the bus broke down, we had to wait there until our parent finally got there to pick us up. Now, I went to school, went to John M. Gander here in high school in Ashland, graduated from there, went to Virginia Union, VCU. I joined the Air Force in 1971, 26 good years of military service, thank the Lord. In the Air Force, I came out in 1974 and joined the Virginia Air National Guard to finish my career time there. Having the past experiences on that base, they had the rebel flags flying there. They had the pilots wore the rebel flags and insignia on the uniforms, patch on their sleeves. And on my airplane, which I'm a crew chief of, there were only 2 black crew chiefs on the flight line of 48 aircraft. And a $48 million aircraft, the F-16 it was at that time. And I protested against the use of this rebel flag because it was embarrassing to me. Well, they fired me what's called a rift 4 times. The last time they rifted me from the Adjutant General of the state of Virginia down to my first line supervisor. I was supposed to have left the base. But by the grace of the Almighty God, I got in touch with Hazel Trice Edney. She is an investigative reporter for the Richmond Free Press, and her boss, Mr. Raymond Boone. And they had me to have an audience with the governor. The governor granted me an audience. He had the state to hire lawyers to investigate Sergeant Brooks and investigate the Air National Guard. Well, the findings came back that Sergeant Brooks had done no wrong. He was being discriminated against while wearing the uniform in the performance of his duties. And that's against the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The governor ordered the flags to be taken down in the state of Virginia in May 1992, and they could no longer fly that flag on the base or any other public place in the state of Virginia. You could fly in the privacy of your homes, but certainly not in any public place. The squadron had to get a new insignia after 45 years of wearing this insignia at the Virginia Air National Guard. I was given the right to go back to work. I came back to work. You can imagine. You can just imagine. It wasn't pleasant. Well, they refused to let me go back on the flight line to work on my aircraft. Each day I come to work, they made me take a right turn and go down to the fuel shop and sit there all day long for 1 solid year from 1994 to 1995. I got paid a check, but they would not let me come to the flight line. And then they signed me off the base with no pay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it goes on now. Let me move on to what happens next. I lost all I ever worked for, and we wound up having to move to King William County, the county next door to us. And we moved into an area that was already under eminent domain, and we did not know it. We moved into an area already condemned. Buzzard's luck. That was pure Buzzard's luck. Mrs. Elizabeth McAllister asked me if I could be the president of the NAACP in the year 2000. We accepted, and then had to go to the Board of Supervisors meeting to argue this eminent domain, which they had did the same thing in King William in 2000 that they did in Hanover County in the 50s and 60s and 70s. It had just gotten to King William. They were taking these people's land. This was a 12-square-mile area of land that they were taking. The Almighty God gave me the right words to say to the Board of Supervisors, and they had to back off of the eminent domain order. They said, what are your plans? I said, well, we need a block grant. I said, well, if you can get it done, then we'll stand behind you. If not, we will continue with the eminent domain. So by the grace of the Almighty God, a good girlfriend of mine named Donna B. Thompson wrote a grant for me that went all the way through from the state to the federal, and we got right at $3 million to build 38 homes in that area after the eminent domain was rescinded. During that time, here on my right is Mr. Frank Plever and Miss Terry Hale. Ladies and gentlemen, I learned a big lesson at that time. The Lord pricked my heart. I never knew many decent European people in my lifetime. I don't know why, but that's the way it was. But when I met Frank Plever and Terry Hale, it changed my heart. And we worked well together. They took their gloves off because they realized that a wonderful thing had happened, but still the community was in a fallen stage of humanity. They, along with myself, we worked hard and diligently for 10 years, and they helped me to uplift the Mount Olive area back into a self-respecting neighborhood. Not long after that, in the year 2003, I was in front of the church, and we were having a youth, NAACP youth meeting there, and a truckload of young European boys pulled up. It's a Hill Fork Road right directly across from the Mount Olive Baptist Church in that area, 632 and Hill Fork Road. They pulled up, and it was, I don't know how many, it was just packed with young men. And they had lasers, and they just sprayed us, and they sprayed the church. It was scary, but the colors were beautiful. It was scary, but the colors were beautiful. And I scurried the children into the church. The truck took off, but it just so happened that day that I was driving my Corvette. And when I came around the curve to straighten that thing out, it was wiggling. And I come on a third gear, I run about 140 miles an hour. That thing felt so good. Because I wanted to catch those guys before they got away. But I caught up to them right when they got ready to turn and duck into the woods, and I got the license plate number. And after having gotten their license plate number, I came back and I called the sheriff of the county. He met with me. I said, Jeff Walton, his name is Jeff Walton. He's still the sheriff of King William County. I said, Mr. Walton, I told him what happened. I said, I am not going to file charges against these young men because it will ruin their lives. They do not know what they have done. In the year 1992, when Miss Hazel Trice Edney was fighting for me against the rebel flag in the state of Virginia, 19 European boys went downtown and testified on my behalf. Not one black, not one of my own, but 19 European boys went downtown and testified in secret. So I say, well, Jeff, I'm going to let these guys go. I'm not going to file charges, although I'm being pressed to do so. I'm not going to do it. It's going to ruin these young men's lives. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it just comes down to the point where the gentleman had said about this humanity. We are now in a global society. This is not black and quote unquote white anymore. This is a humanity that we must now serve. This is a global society. All that we have and all that we enjoy, the comforts, pleasures of life, the safeties of life, here in the United States, we owe it to the assistance of others. And there's nothing we could have outside the bands of a society. And that's what makes it so important that we protect this delicate democracy that we are in. In the name of Jesus the Christ, amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. Rob Stiles is our next speaker. The youngster in our panel, Rob grew up in Ashland on Caroline Street, across from Randolph-Macon College. He still resides in Ashland on Howard Street with his wife, Sharon. They have 2 sons, George and Ethan. Rob is a 1984 graduate of Patrick Henry High School and a 1990 graduate of Virginia Commonwealth University. He is Senior Vice President and Division Leader of Risk Service for Marsh and McLennan Agency. Rob's father, Ned Stiles, was a storyteller in 2015. We are pleased Rob wanted to be a panelist this year. Rob.
My name is Rob Stiles, and I've lived in Ashland my entire life. I was born in 1966 during segregation, and I was too young to realize what was going on around me. I grew up across the street from Randolph-Macon College, and my childhood is full of memories of RMC sporting events and playing all over the campus, often getting kicked out of the buildings. I started school in 1971, attending Hanover Academy. Unknown to me at the time, Hanover Academy was established in 1959 for white families to avoid the segregation of Hanover County schools. I didn't know why I went there. I just thought it was because my older sisters did and my cousins did. I never felt like we went there due to race because we were raised by example to follow the golden rule and to focus on a person's character versus where they came from or the color of their skin. In a previous Untold Stories event, my father, Ned Stiles, shared that he wasn't truly aware of the difference between being black and white in our world until he was in the Army and had a black roommate named Bob Johnson. This experience changed his perspective and understanding of black and white and right and wrong, and he passed this on to his children. I learned later that we were removed from Hanover Academy by our parents, and our father resigned from the board after a black family was denied acceptance because of their race. The decision was later reversed, but the family chose not to attend because, of course, they didn't feel welcome. We were eventually re-enrolled in Hanover Academy. Hanover Academy was one hallway, no gym, but a huge playground with jungle gyms, ball fields, swing sets, concrete pipes, and a blacktop that would tear your hands and knees up if you fell down. There was a creek that ran down the side of the blacktop in the playground full of frogs and tadpoles. Someone always found a way to fall in the creek. There were about 25 to 35 kids per grade. I remember the significance of the first black child, Ricky Davis, attending kindergarten at Hanover Academy when I was in the 7th grade, 20 years after its founding. I don't always remember what I did yesterday, but I remember the name of that. I remember his name to this day. I played Little League football for the Ashland Vikings and made a lot of friends of all colors that I would keep throughout my childhood. All races played together. There were no separate teams, fields, or playgrounds. We used the same doors, the same bathrooms, and the same classrooms, and rode the same buses. I started attending public school in 1979. Liberty was a big step coming from Little Hanover Academy, and not because of race, just the sheer number of kids, changing classes, navigating the cafeteria, multiple hallways, and gym class. The big shock for me my first day in 8th grade was a guy in my homeroom that had a full beard, thicker than mine right now. And I was like, how old is this guy? I will tell a story. Jim Davis shared his story about getting on the bus for the first time to attend Patrick Henry. And I will say my first day getting on the bus to attend Liberty was the complete opposite of Jim's. Just in the race reversal. There were only a handful of white kids on this bus, and the rest were black junior high and high school students, and it was intimidating. But you know what? It passed. There was never any threat. I just realized, you know what? This isn't Hanover Academy anymore. All through high school, I had white and black friends, and we would hang out together at school and school events. But outside of that, our social circles were still very different. We would attend, parties of together sometimes, but we didn't have the social media platform kids had today to find out where everything was going on. Growing up in Ashland was fantastic, but of course I didn't fully appreciate it until I was older and starting a family of my own. Most of my closest friends are from growing up in Ashland. In honor of Black History Month, I would like to recognize 2 Black adults that played a major role in my life. My first job was at Cross Brothers Grocery Store, and Harold Lee Abrams was senior to me in the bag boy hierarchy. I was 15 years old. I was a 15-year-old kid. I don't know how old Harold Lee was. He looked the same his entire life. But Harold Lee took me under his wing and taught me the fine points of bagging groceries and how to treat customers. He was an avid Dallas Cowboys fan, and I was an avid anybody but Dallas fan. So there was always healthy football banter between us. Harold Lee always knew the customers that tipped. If he was outside taking care of a customer and I started bagging a tipping customer, he would come in, step in front of me, and tell me, "I got this one." At first, I didn't realize why he was doing it, but I figured it out when he wasn't able to take one from me. I would always give it up to him. First work-life lesson, know your customer. Whenever I could, I would stop by and see Harold Lee and say hello and talk about who was beating the Cowboys next. Virginia Brown was our housekeeper growing up. She would come on Tuesdays and Thursdays to clean and do laundry. She was family. My parents were divorced when I was 13 years old. For a few years prior to that, my mom was finding her new self, and Virginia was always there as the backstop and helped raise us. She often referred to us as her children, and her own children knew we were her children too. Like any family matriarch, she would speak her mind and tell it like it is. After my parents divorced, I stayed with my dad, and Virginia always had a watchful eye on me, making sure I was staying out of trouble and that my friends were good enough. She was a great judge of character and would tell me if she didn't like somebody or she didn't like what I was doing. It was always a good day when you came home from school and Virginia had fried some chicken. My mouth would water coming up the back sidewalk. The best story that relates to the impact Virginia had on our family actually deals with my father. Shortly after the divorce, Virginia left my dad a note. "Mr. Stiles, cut the grass and trim the hedges. We don't live in a jungle." And she used the term "we." She included herself in that comment. Guess what my dad did that weekend? She was our housekeeper for more than 50 years and part of our family for longer than that. We would always try to get by and see her after we left the nest. Virginia passed away last year at the age of 95, and she was holding court until her last breath. Everyone would be better for having Virginia Brown in their life. And that's it.
Thank you, Rob. Sandra Richberg Howard is our next speaker. Sandra grew up on Mount Herman Road. She attended John M. Gandy School from the first grade through graduation in 1968. She spent 5.5 years in the United States Air Force, following by working as a news reporter for Channel 6 in Wilmington, North Carolina. Sandra retired from Philip Morris. She left Ashland in 1969 and returned in 2004. Sandra lives on Elmont Road. Sandra.
Hello, I'm Sandra Howard. This is my story growing up in Ashland, Hanover. We were the only black family on Mount Herman Road. It was 8 of us, and we played together. Since a predominantly black area called Brown Grove was adjacent to us, seemed 1,000,000 miles away, we rode the bus with them. I tell you, we had a long walk to that bus stop in the cold. Mr. Woolfolk was our bus driver. Sometimes he was late. There was a little white lady named Miss Patterson who wore a Quaker hat. A Quaker hat is a bonnet. She would let us in her house, give us hot chocolate, and we stood by her window until we saw the bus coming. I started the first grade at John M. Gandy. Our teachers in elementary school were about our learning, and learning is what we did. You knew when you left the house that morning that you was going to school to learn. The teacher's word was gospel. There were major consequences at my house. If the teacher called and our parents believed the teacher, end of conversation. They just believed everything they said. I really wanted to be home with my sisters and brothers. I had an older sister that showed me how to make a house out of leaves, and I could never get it right, so I would knock her house down. I just loved playing with her. Okay, I made friends in elementary school again, and we're still close. 54 years later, Leon is one of them. When we were outside again in school, we just ran around. We didn't have a playground. I do remember May Day. It was the event of the year. We dressed in our finest, wearing crinoline slips, dancing around the maypole, and even did a little waltz. Our parents came, we ate, and had a grand old time. I don't really remember if we were poor. We ate good, lived in good shelter, and wore decent clothes. And all the families we socialized with, they were on the same level. I only learned I possibly might have been poor when I joined the United States Air Force. We went to Sunday school and church at Shiloh Baptist Church on James Street, and we got together on Sundays. That was grand for us. We had plenty of love in my house, and most of all, we had discipline and respect for our parents and for one another. As I got older, I went to John M. Gandy High School, just across the sidewalk. I don't remember being junior or high school. It was just grand to be up there with the big boys and girls. It was good enough for me. I became the safety patrol on my school bus, and I loved it because the children had to listen to me. And if they didn't, I'd just write them up. Next, I became drum majorette. I was really moving up. Racism. Well, it just was not spoken particularly in public because they stayed on their side and we stayed on our side. By them, I mean whites versus black folk. We just didn't mingle. I never remember us having any problems. We just left each other alone. We could buy ice cream at High's ice cream store, and we could buy food at Barnes drugstore, but we couldn't sit down and eat it. Dr. Vaughn had a side interest we came in. We learned from TV the world felt we were not considered equal. My mother, of course, made us know we were equal in somebody. My mom would hold our faces, kiss our cheeks, and tell us that we were the most important people or persons in the world. We talked about being colored people in my house, and we were taught by my great-grandmother that we were of African descent and that we came from Madagascar. I was around 8 to 10 years old when my great-grandmother died, and we knew who we were in our house. High school was so much fun for me. We had dances and togetherness. Our last year in 1968, we were asked if we wanted to go to Patrick Henry High School. Only 2 persons accepted. Then on April 4th, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Now the message hit home in my head. After graduation, I was kind of restless and I kind of wanted to see the world. Actually, I was tired of school. Took some courses at Virginia Union, then I went to GE for a bit, but in October 1969, I joined the United States Air Force. God truly gave me favor. I grew up and became an adult. The United States Air Force was my introduction to racism. You take a test, you pass, you get your red line, but somehow, seemingly, the black girls were always late getting their stripe or didn't get to tech school that they should go. See, because that was our money and our promotion, and that's how they held us back. Well, I was stationed in China in 1972. My mother got killed by a white drunk driver. He never served a day. That's how it was back then. He could never understand the pain that he caused their family and the entire family. It was terrible. But we just got together. My little sister was 12. My little brother was 10. We banded together and took care of our family. And my little sister and brother are great adults today. When I got out of the Air Force, I lived in Wilmington, North Carolina. I needed a job, so I auditioned as a news reporter at Channel 6. I got the job. I had the pleasure of meeting Coretta King, Maynard Jackson, Angela Davis, and James Brown. They came to Wilmington to support a function for the Wilmington 10, 9 black men and 1 black woman who were wrongfully convicted of arson and conspiracy in Wilmington in 1971. I moved on, and God has surely given me favor continuously. I married my childhood sweetheart. We started first grade together. We have 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and a great-grandson. We moved back to Ashland in 2004, and I retired from Philip Morris. I am now a member of Ebenezer Baptist Church with Dr. John Kinney. It's a wonderful place to worship. And a little bit of tidbit, when God's with you, you can't lose. I didn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Our next speaker is C. Reeves Pretty. Reeves grew up outside of Ashland on Mount Airy Farm as the oldest of 5 children. Duncan Memorial Methodist Church was and is now again her church home. She graduated from Patrick Henry in 1970 and Hollins College in 1976. Babysitting was her first job. She worked at Meads & Company while searching for a social worker counselor position. After 6 years as a counselor at the Hanover Learning Center, she completed her master's at the Presbyterian School of Christian Education. 3 church jobs in United Methodist and Episcopal churches followed before she began a 23-year career as the lower school region teacher and lay chaplain at St. Catherine's School in Richmond. She retired in June of 2020. Reeves and her wife, Nancy Cook, built their retirement home in Ashland Park 3 years ago. Reeves.
My name is Reeves Pretty, and when I was 4, we moved from Waverly, my mother's hometown, to my father's hometown of Ashland, after my parents restored an old farmhouse across the road from where Patrick Henry High School would open in 1959, 3 years later. I attended kindergarten with Mrs. Smith and first grade with Mrs. Dillon. My father was concerned about the advent of integrated schools, and with other concerned, moderately well-to-do white fathers, founded Hanover Academy to protect us. Ironically, because of the low pay, many of my teachers were retired teachers or clergy spouses and were fairly progressive for their day, with one major exception. Lila Lee Riddell, the only child of an last child of an elderly Confederate soldier who named her after General Robert E. Lee. My Spanish teacher was a refugee from Cuba, where she had been a school principal. That was eye-opening. Lots of my lessons were the antithesis of what had been imagined. There was not much in the way of a library. I remember the World Book Encyclopedia and the little orange books that purported to be the biographies of famous Americans and often told fictional tales of those heroes' and heroines' childhoods. On the plus side, women and African Americans were among the mix. I read all of those. We did have a Civil War centennial celebration, where half of us wore gray caps of the South and the other half wore the blue caps of the North. I was assigned a blue cap. We sang the camp songs of both sides. Goober Peas and the Battle Hymn of the Republic come to mind, but there were others, including the Star-Spangled Banner, which we all sang together at the end. I graduated from 7th grade in 1965. My church home was Duncan Memorial, where many of my Sunday school teachers were professors or staff at Randolph-Macon. Some of them were involved in the civil rights movement. In addition, the Methodist women sponsored yearly mission studies that included learning about different cultures, religious traditions, and a wide variety of social issues. Only later did I learn that not all Methodist Sunday school children were getting the same gospel lessons that I was receiving. Our only forays into North Ashland were for birthday cakes from Newton Lightfoot's Bakery, except for a brief while when a young black man lived in our basement and we'd drop him at John M. Gandy in the morning on the way to Hanover Academy. The main thing I remember about that experience was being told that he was going to school to learn how to can food because that was the kind of work he would be able to get when he was out on his own. A memory of Mr. Strauss, better known as Snookums, stands out. I am embarrassed that I did not know his given name, but was pleased to learn later that the word Snookums was a term of endearment and not necessarily a put-down. He was a small, friendly man with some intellectual limitations who covered the town on foot and seemed to know and be known by all as he was the shoeshine boy at LaFoon's barbershop. My elementary Sunday school class was meeting on the steps of Blackwell Auditorium when I noticed him walking north on Henry Street. My young mind assumed that meant he did not have a church to attend. So I went home and told my parents that I thought we should invite Snookums to our church. My father was not amused. He called the teacher and the Sunday school superintendent to meet with him at our home to discuss what they were teaching me. They came and talked, rather loudly, I recall. Mom kept taking us to Sunday school and church, and she took me to plays at Randolph-Macon, The Diary of Anne Frank and John Brown's Body. She also introduced me to the music of Peter, Paul, and Mary, who had sung in the 1963 March on Washington. I reviewed my yearbooks to refresh my memory of some specifics of integration of my years at Patrick Henry. When I entered 8th grade, you could count on one hand the number of black students, and there were 4 black maintenance workers. Hanover offered what was called freedom of choice to skirt the mandates of integration. Each year, there were a few more until 1969, when Virginia could no longer postpone the mandate. My family hosted a number of foreign exchange students. The summer between my 8th and 9th grade years, we hosted one from Brazil. We managed to be assigned the only blonde, curly-haired girl in the group of dark-haired brown students. Another major life lesson, though, Evelyn's parents were unable to immigrate to the USA because they were German Jews. Other God moments during the next few years include my 10th grade English teacher's assignment to write a story with the cue word black. Most of us missed the mark by a mile and were required to rewrite it, including me. Mom took my next younger brother and me to see Guess Who's Coming to Dinner when it came to Ashland. A visiting required overnight accommodations, and I volunteered to share my room. When my name was called, I stood. The student's name was called, and the lone black man in the choir stepped forward from the group. Immediately, the teacher said that student would be staying at her house, and I went home alone. At the end of my junior year, as Hanover schools were prepared for full integration, I was among those chosen from Patrick Henry to be a part of the transition team. Mr. Durham, the assistant principal, was our convener. A similar group was chosen from among the Gandy students who would be moving to Patrick Henry. When we met for the first time, before meeting our counterparts at Gandy, Mr. Durham asked if we'd thought about how we could contribute to making this a positive transition for all. Always the cheerful, talkative, no surprise there, welcoming teenager, I popped up and said something to the effect that we would welcome them with open arms to our school. Mr. Durham gently said that that was a kind thought. However, we would all be in a new school together, with elements from both schools coming together as one. Another life-changing aha. That summer, I was Patrick Henry's representative to Girls State, where one of the 3 black students in attendance was my roommate. Frances lived near the college I was hoping to attend, and we kept in touch for several years after that. I believe senior year was hard on almost everyone, but we forged new friendships and somehow made it work. Only one student from Gandy was among our senior class officers. Seniors from both schools got to keep their own school rings, yet I cannot imagine what that meant to my peers from Gandy. And I certainly can't imagine what it was like for those who went from Gandy to Lee Davis. Another time, I remember there being a discussion that certainly a white girl would be crowned Miss Patrick Henry High School. And my mother reminded us that while we had our ideas about what beauty was, we did not know what was considered beautiful from a black perspective. The judges solved that by crowning a white Miss Patrick Henry and a black runner-up. For the most part, after graduation, we all went our separate ways. My integrated freshman class at Hollins College was the result of the senior class's protest their freshman year, and I was blessed to make lifelong friends of many races and cultures. All of my jobs were because someone I knew worked or had a contact at those places of employment and recommended me. It was very much a case of who you knew. My first job at the Hanover Learning Center was life-changing. I was in the minority racially and by gender. Most of the students were from poorer black families. The few white boys that came were guilty of much greater crimes. I left for graduate school to pursue religious education and eventually was blessed to teach little girls of a variety of religions, races, and cultural backgrounds to see themselves, their family, and their faith traditions in God's stories.
Thank you, Reeves. Our last speaker is James M. Davis. James is a resident of Glen Allen, Virginia. He is married to his lovely wife of 41 years, Carmen. Together they have 3 beautiful daughters, Jasmine, Unica, and Jamie. He earned a Bachelor's of Science at Virginia State University and acquired his MA at the International Seminary. James is a newly retired senior sales manager for the Fortune 500 company, FedEx Corporation. He has received numerous awards and accolades for his managerial style and leadership in sales. After 35 years of service and commitment, James and Carmen made the decision to return to his hometown in the Glen Allen area of Hanover County. His hobbies include establishing the first men's a cappella choir at his church, playing golf, and horticulture.
Good afternoon. My name is James M. Davis, Jr., and I'm going to tell my untold story growing up in Ashland/Hanover. During the late 50s and early 60s, I grew up in the community called Glen Allen, and Glen Allen, the part of Hanover, not Henrico. As a student, I attended John M. Gandy, like some other of my counterparts here today, in Ashland, Virginia. Whenever I rode the bus to school, I could always count on the bus being late for school because the bus most of the time was broken down. It gave us, I guess as kids, because I grew up in a neighborhood with mostly all of my cousins, a time to play before school. So even though the school bus was not reliable, it allowed us a time to just have some fun, I guess at the risk of the school bus being broken down. I attended school from the 1st grade through the 7th grade at Gandy. The bus that I rode to attend school included high school students as well. So if you can imagine 1st graders riding the bus together with high schools, it was sort of chaotic at times, but also challenging and also an experience for us as little kids growing up together with older kids. The first time I realized the meaning of segregation or going to a segregated school, I was riding the bus through Ashland. As I looked through the window, I saw a sign on the storefront that read, "No colored," and it was in a public store. The learning environment brought both advantages and disadvantages while attending Gandy. I experienced limited and inferior textbooks with very little teaching resources. There was no diversity in the student population or teaching staff. Our teachers were made up of mainly African Americans. They were both compassionate and caring. Our teachers were committed to ensuring that every student obtained a good education. Overall, it was like a big family that took care and took time to help each other and try to help the next generation as students to move forward and to better their education. We respected our teachers, and I was inspired by the adults and their professions. They were mentors, leaders, and applied discipline when necessary to the seat of correction. There were no nonsense, and they had the support of the parents if it came down to discipline. When I turned 13 years of age in 1975, I learned about the Freedom of Choice program. This allowed African Americans to attend their school of choice. After a discussion with my parents, I decided I would no longer continue my education at Gandy, but would attend Patrick Henry High School. The decision posed many challenges, but I believe it was worth the risk to obtain a quality education. I wanted to grow as an individual. The first day I attended Patrick Henry High School, my mother walked me down to the bus stop, which was at the corner of Mountain Road and Ashland Road, right in front of the Stanley store, as it was called back during that time. She provided me the moral support that I needed on my first day attending Patrick Henry. The anticipation of getting on a school bus filled with Caucasian students was a bit scary, but I did not feel intimidated. As I got onto the bus, there wasn't a single student on the bus that looked like me. It wasn't a warm welcome, and I asked a young boy, could I sit down beside him? As soon as I asked him that, he got up and he moved. And everyone on the bus began to laugh. It was filled with laughter on the bus. Everyone laughed except me. The next day I got on the bus and asked a girl, could I sit down beside her? And she did. She allowed me to sit beside her, and the first thing I thought was she would get up and move again. Instead, she stayed and began to have a small conversation with me. From that moment on, I felt more accepted. During that time, there were only 6 people of color attending Patrick Henry High School. It was the 2 Thompson sisters, the 2 Jackson siblings, Brenda and Alfred, and Theodore Carter, who was from Brown Grove, and myself. As a teenager, God blessed me with the ability to play sports. So I engaged in playing football, basketball, baseball, and track at Patrick Henry. Being involved in sports allowed me to connect socially with classmates and gain the respect of my teammates. It also strengthened my leadership skills, as I was chosen as the captain of the football and basketball team. This was truly a blessing and an honor, as this position was achieved only by my white counterparts in the past. Being selected by my peers was an honor. It allowed me to see beyond the color of my skin. I also noted 2 of my coaches that were instrumental and inspired me as leadership and mentoring myself. It was Coach Flanagan in basketball and Coach Bill Counts in football. One summer during football practice, it was very hot, and as you know, it gets hot in August in Virginia. I attended the morning practice, and many of the players complained about the heat. It was very hot, and a lot of the players began to get sick. There was also an afternoon practice that was scheduled as well. Knowing that, I decided to go home and rest. In my mind, I'd also made the decision that I would not attend the afternoon practice. While I was resting and kicking back and chilling out, I guess, two of my teammates knocked on my door. They had been instructed by the coach to come and get me. And I said, "Why are you here?" And they said, the coach said, "The practice will not start, Jim, until you get there." I believe that the coach at that time had lost his mind. So, but you know, it was a learning lesson for myself as a leader. It was about holding myself accountable and also being a member of a team. You lead by example. Participating in sports not only developed character within me, it also provided an avenue for me to further my education. My parents did not have the financial funds for me to attend college. So I was determined to use the best of my ability that God had given me and the talents to attain an athletic scholarship. By God's grace, my goal was accomplished. The Richmond Times-Dispatch came out to my parents' home for an interview. They took pictures and wrote a nice article about my accomplishments. It was one of the most rewarding experiences for both my parents and I. Attending Patrick Henry prepared me for career development. I also believe my social interactions with my teammates and having a diverse group of classmates and teachers prepared me for the real world that we live in. I believe I'm a better person because I was engaged with diverse backgrounds, colors, and cultures. Once I graduated from college and began working in my profession, I realized the exposure to various cultures and backgrounds was truly a gift that every child can benefit from, not only in my community, but as well as our county, our state, and our nation. After obtaining my BS degree in business administration from Virginia State University, I relocated to Philadelphia, PA. I began a career in food services and later moved into transportation. Both of the corporation was Fortune 500 companies. These interactions and exposure to diverse communities afforded me the opportunities for promotion and leadership in higher level management positions. I was blessed to have the opportunity to live and work in many major cities on the East Coast: Washington, and Maryland, Baltimore, Philly, New Jersey, and New York City. During my stint in New York City, it was there that I experienced the tragedy of 9/11, which I believe was a divine disruption for our nation. It was a time when the city that never sleeps came to an immediate stop. People from all ethnic backgrounds, genders, color, religion, and political affiliations came together as one nation under God. After retiring from the corporate world, my wife Carmen and I returned to Glen Allen, Virginia to live. There have been many positive changes in our county since my return to Virginia. I have observed an increase in population, new structures, buildings, highways coming up everywhere. Cultural diversity is also evident, along with opportunities for career development. But we are still not there yet. We still have a long ways to go as a county, as neighborhoods, as far as moving forward with relationships. We must cultivate more meaningful partnerships with respect to race relations in our businesses, in our place of worship, and in our neighborhoods. It is my hope and prayer that we will all accept the challenge and the responsibility to love thy neighbor as we love ourselves. I believe then, and only then, will we develop a better county, a better state, a better nation, and a better world. Thank you.
Thank you, James. We are fortunate to have Dr. Jamel S. Wilson to bring us closing comments. Dr. Wilson was a longtime educator in Hanover County Public Schools, an English teacher, lead teacher specialist, and widely respected superintendent of schools for Hanover County Public Schools. She was named Region 1 Superintendent in 2015. She served as Vice President of the Virginia Board of Education. Dr. Wilson is currently the Dean of the School of Professional and Continuing Studies at the University of Richmond. Her two sons went to Hanover schools, graduating from Patrick Henry High School. Dr. Wilson is a dedicated gardener and a talented singer who has shared her singing talents with our community gospel choir and in the Ashland Musical Variety Show. Dr. Wilson has been involved in our Untold Stories since it began, and we appreciate her insight.
We're so glad you've had the opportunity to hear our Untold Stories. I'm taping here in the Ashland train station. Actually, it's also the visitor center. And what you may not know is that this building actually represented a level of segregation here in our own community. There was a wall that ran from one side of the building to the other, which illustrated where people could be and where they couldn't be. So today's taping, my coming to you in this particular place, is incredibly important to the theme of what you've just heard. Some of you are certainly familiar with Shakespeare's As You Like It. In his monologue, the character Jacques says this: "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man or woman in his time plays many parts." And he goes on to talk about the 7 ages of man: the infant, the schoolboy, the lover, the soldier, the justice, what we might call the retiree, and then the individual at his death. What we've heard in these 6 untold stories represents a number of those stages. And there are themes that you've heard run through the comments. There's the theme of the importance of community. The fact that there are villages that have helped raise our children, that have shaped the individuals you've heard from, parents and coworkers, all of whom work together to discipline and to instill confidence in the speakers. The second theme that I heard run through these conversations was curiosity and the innocence of childhood. Many of our speakers talked about the moment at which their innocence was shaken, but perhaps more importantly, how they've come back to recognize the innocence that they embraced as children as they've become adults, and dealing with and thinking about and thinking through who they are in this world as it relates to race and race relations. The third theme is the value of education. I wouldn't be a good educator if I did not think about the importance of teachers. And we heard from a number of our speakers the importance of teachers and coaches to their lives, how they helped nurture each of these individuals, and how educators nurture us. So thank you all so much for joining in this conversation, in thinking about what all of our speakers have continually. One particular note that I will make, Terry Alexander talked about the fact that in many cases, people were unseen and unknown. Well, through this work, through these untold stories, please know that we are all seen. Our stories will be known. So keep telling your stories. We are so grateful to Terry Alexander, Leon Brooks Sr., Rob Stiles, Sandra Howard, Reeves Pretty, and James Davis Jr. for sharing their stories with us. I'd particularly like to thank Leon Brooks and Sandra Howard for your service to our country. We appreciate your sacrifice and that of your family.
Thank you, Jamel. Before we wrap up, I want to note the passing of Joe Giles. This earlier month, Joe was a speaker in 2016 and served on the Untold Stories Committee. We will miss his contributions, energy, and smile. He was a true gentleman. As we close this year's program, please remember and support our sponsors, the Hanover Arts and Activity Center, the Hanover County Black Heritage Society, the Ashland Museum, and the Downtown Ashland Association. Our previous programs have concluded with our community gospel choir. This year, we are including an encore presentation of 2 songs. Enjoy, and we hope to see you in person for our program next year.
Oh, beautiful, for heroes prove in livering strife, who more than self their country love, and mercy more than life. I'm talking about America, sweet America. May God thy gold refine till all success be noblest and every gain divine. love you, America. My God, he done shed his grace on thee, and he crowned. He told me he would